The first one we're going to talk about, Betty, maybe goes along with what you have there, but the first one was about how families got their food, homegrown gardens, and how you prepared them, maybe fixed them differently, took longer. And also you might even talk a little bit about refrigeration, how you kept them cool.
Did you know I can remember when there was nothing but a spring for you to put your stuff down in.
Well, good. Tell us. That's what we want to hear. We'll be ready. We're ready now. You can go ahead and tell us about it.
Okay. Well, when I was a very small child, we had to raise, everyone had to raise his own food. There were a few stores, but they had limited amount of food. Usually it was just buttons and bows and ribbons and things like that. They got coffee and tea and sugar and no lard. They didn't keep lard or shortening of any kind, or because they knew the farmers were going to raise their own. And neither did they have meal and flour because the farmer raised his own and went to the mill with it. And the farmer had his fields, like his cotton fields and his corn fields and his wheat fields, a good distance from the house, but he also, near the home, he had a large garden, and out of this garden he raised his family, and the mother canned up enough to last them. They had cellars then with a ground floor, and on this ground floor sweet potatoes and Irish potatoes and turnips and rutabagas were covered up, and they would last all winter and until the spring gardens started coming in. And around the cellar were shelves, and all kinds of jellies and jams and preserves and pickles were canned, also vegetables and fruits. So people ate natural foods from their own garden, from their own fields, and they had just about anything they wanted. I can remember when my grandmother used to start cooking on Friday, and she had a big cupboard, no refrigeration, a large cupboard, and here she would bake all kinds of cakes and pies and boil meats and baked meats. And Sunday dinner, Sunday when they went to church, it seemed to me like when I was a child, half the church came home with with them to eat. And they were farmers just like my grandfather, and they would sit around and sing and talk and enjoy each other while they were resting from their work.
That's excellent. That day, because of the way it was prepared and the ingredients.
The parents, the ladies had to cook on a wood stove, and a lot of times cobs were used for fuel on these stoves. Naturally, they didn't get too hot, so we preserved a lot of our vitamins in our food then because we didn't have the heat that electricity and gas gives us and today. So I think a lot of the vitamins were saved in our food then. And I can remember on the farm, now it was my grandmother's and grandfather's farm. We had a big garden spot, but I'm thinking about the time when I would really visit in the country and see how they lived and cooked. As soon as they had breakfast, my grandfather would go out to feed before they went to the fields, and my grandmother would take one or two of her older girls, and they'd head for the garden to get the food for the day. And they'd get okra and squash and carrots and beans. They'd come back home and cook it, and then when the farmers came home to eat lunch, they called it dinner then. It was really dinner because all of this food was cooked. plus some cakes and pies and things like that. And they all ate a big meal at noon. And then they'd rest for a while, and then they'd go back to the field. And when they came home at night, they had to go to bed early because there was nothing to listen to or nothing to look at. And they ate before dark, cornbread and milk, mostly, and maybe some fruit. That was their dinner.
That's fine. That's fine. If I cut in occasionally, don't the next one a bit about how the homes were built, how they were different than today's homes, so we get a feeling what it was like to live in those homes when you were first coming up.
Yes. In the early days, it seemed that most of the homes were built with a hallway down the center of the building. And bedrooms were on either side, and at the front was what they call their living room. And at the back were the dining rooms and kitchens. And everybody had to have a large kitchen and a large dining room because they had so many children. And there was no central heating. Usually there was one fireplace. And then later they had one stove. Well, the better people maybe had 2 stoves. And they were judged in the community about their success with how many stoves they had. That is a 2-stove family. Or this is a 1-stove family. And the ones in the community who had two stoves probably had more prestige.
That's fine. And what we'll do, we'll insert a cutaway here.
Yeah.
Will be a second here until we get back on. Just a second. Okay.
I remember when I was a small child, I'm still thinking about down in the country, we called it, toward Nickajack Cave, where all these people live that I'm telling you about. They, of course, they weren't poor. They had everything under the sun they wanted or needed. They didn't want much. And they certainly had all the food and clothing they needed because all the women sewed beautifully. And my great uncle was a little more prosperous than most of the other people out in that section. And if a family, mother and father died and left children, he took them in. I think he said that he had raised 25 children, and I don't doubt it because every time we visited down there, they had oodles of children around. Some of them are still alive, too, and I know them. They still talk about Aunt Becky and Uncle William. And one of the boys, when he became a man, became very successful in the coal mining business around Etna Mountain. You've heard of Etna Mountain? Well, that's where this was. So he built himself a beautiful home. Then he said, now I'm going to build my father a beautiful home because he has had nothing but this log house all of his life. And before they die, I want them to have a nice home. So he built a nice bungalow. At this time, most all the children that he had raised were away and gone from the home. And he went down in the Nickajack community and brought his old dad up to see this fine new home he built with a bathroom in. That's the first time that anybody had ever built a bathroom in that community. So when Uncle William came in, he looked at the house, and everything about it was just beautiful. It was plastered and painted, and he'd only been used to logs. And they took him in and said, now here is your inside bathroom. You and Ma won't have to go outside at all. And he stopped. He was a very humorous old man. He was Irish. And he scratched his head. He said, I like the house. The kitchen and dining room are fine. The bedrooms are all fine. But that bathroom has got to go. There's nobody going to have a toilet inside my house. And Uncle John had to tear it out of there and move it in a little house in the back, the bathroom and the commode both. He just would not live in the house with it in there.
That's real good. That's fine. First in the country, and then later you moved to Chattanooga. If you can kind of tell us about some of the differences.
Well, the first, doesn't the first car come in?
No,
Yeah.
we'll get to the car a little later.
Oh, yeah.
What I want you to tell me now is just the difference in living out in the country versus living in the town, just how you went about your days a little differently, that they weren't quite the same. If you give us some feeling for the difference.
Mm-hmm. Well, when I was a child, country living was not too backward from town living, because they didn't have anything in the town either at that time. They didn't have refrigerators or electric stoves, TV or radio, or none of those things that we have today. And they were busier because the towns were having businesses, being commercialized and having businesses and bigger stores. They could go to town and buy dresses and their clothing, where in the country we had to make them. And that took up a lot of times too. If you remember, you don't remember, no, but then people had to work 10 hours a day in the mills and in the places of business. So actually, at this time and period, people in the country had more leisure time than people in town, because we had our living already made out in the country, and they had to work 10 hours a day to make theirs, and they didn't live as good as we did either.
That's real good. The reaction you had to seeing a car, and then later how you got your driver's license only about 6-7 years ago. If you can tell us about that experience as well. Put the two together.
See if I can, yeah.
Okay, fine.
We were still living in the country at this time, and my father came driving up one day with a car, and most of the children hadn't even seen a car up till this time. And we thought this was fine, because usually in the adjoining little towns, if they had some kind of recreation, we'd just hitch up and drive in the buggy or the wagon, or the neighbor's buggy and wagon. And here we had a car. This was going to be fabulous. And he brought the car home on a Saturday. Well, on a Sunday afternoon, he took us all out for a ride, and all of us became car sick. And so the next day, he said, well, the children are going to get sick in this car all the time. I'll have to get rid of it. And he sold it again. He paid $500 for it, and he sold it for $500. Brand new car. And now I think about, well, why didn't he take that $500 and do like Mr. J.T. Lupton did? Buy a Coca-Cola formula. But he didn't do this. But we didn't have a car then again until we moved to town, and most of the kids were going to school, and maybe one or two working, and the streetcar was right up on the corner, so we had no need for a car. So it was a long time before we had a car. And then when we all got grown, he decided he'd buy him a car, and we teased him about it. We said when he brought the car home, there was a bale of hay in the back, because he felt like the car had to eat.
That's fine, Daddy.
Nowadays, you hear everyone talking about how little time they have. This is a meeting, and there's a meeting. Children have to go here, and the Brownies meet one day, and the Girl Scouts the next day, and mothers and fathers are just as busy as they can be. And I believe when we lived in the country before this all started, that we actually had more time for leisure, such as it was. Our leisure had to be going down to Sam's house and singing, spending the evening singing. And on Wednesday night, everybody had to go to prayer meeting, and you weren't thought anything at all of if you didn't go to prayer meeting and to church on Sunday. And in our little community, there were only 2 churches, and one church met in the morning, and everybody went to that. And then in the afternoon, the other church had its Sunday school and church, and we all went there. And we didn't know that we weren't supposed to do this, and we couldn't tell the difference because we all believed the same thing. And this gave us recreation and times to spend together. And then we had ice cream festivals. Oh, that was a great thing then, back there, to have an ice cream festival, because the stores that time did not have the refrigeration in, and the ice cream had to be brought down in some kind of salt or some ice or salt on the train just before the ice cream festival. But we thought that was great. And then we'd have box suppers. But we didn't go in too much for candy pulling. That happened in an area, a previous area. But I can remember that people used to talk about what grand times they'd have at a candy pulling. And now you ask me to talk to you about weddings.